Hello folks, I hope you're having a good day today. Today I'm going to take a look at the final of the stories in sort of the initial collection of stories in Zothique, written by Clark Ashton Smith. It's called The Last Hieroglyph, which we're going to be looking at today and reviewing for you really briefly and such. Now, The Last Hieroglyph was kind of written by Clark Ashton Smith as sort of the coda to his Zothique cycle. He really enjoyed his Zothique cycle. It's set basically in a future world on Earth where we're so far into the future that magic has returned, as have the old gods, the old style magical items and so forth. Animating undead, that sort of thing. It's all still happening, and so forth in the far future. As we get closer and closer to the end, and the land of Zothique is set in one continent of Zothique that's left on Earth. The sun has mostly died away. And there will be days in which there's pretty much no light from the sun at all. Light is coming from artificial sources, and so forth. So it's near the end days. People don't like each other. They're all out for themselves. They become more decadent and turn against themselves, and so forth, much more evil. And in fact, in many of these stories that Clark Ashton Smith writes, everybody in the story is evil. Like, for example, in The Dark Eidolon, which this one is actually named after, this Penguin Classics collection is actually named after Dark Eidolon and other stories. The Dark Eidolon, all three of the main characters are not nice. They're all evil. You're not rooting for any of them, even the protagonist. You're all hoping they'll get their comeuppance as a reader. The same thing happens with many of these other stories too, that are set here. So what we're going to be taking, although he actually does have a story which I do like, called The Witchcraft of Lua, where he actually writes against that sort of take on his world, which I appreciate because it enriches his world. And actually the main character there and one of the other people in it are actually good and trying to help other people, which I actually think is particularly interesting, refreshing and such. So we'll take a look at the final coda. Now, he finished up his story of collections with this story, and then he decided to come back to it because he loved the world so much. Now, he asked that when people go back and read his stuff, that they read them in chronological order to the way he published them, but then skip the Last Hieroglyph and then push it back to the end. If you want to do that, that's fine. You can. I will be later on, although it won't be for a while. I'm going to move on to other writers, but I will be doing some Clark Ashton Smith stuff. But I want to finish up his Zothique, his first book of Zothique short stories with this book, with The Last Hieroglyph. But again, if you wanted to put off reading this until the end of the Zothique because you really like these sort of stories, please feel encouraged to do that. That's how he would have preferred you to have done it as a reader. I actually think that it's better to do it the way he published them, including this particular story, because like a lot of writers, when you read them in the published order, they'll make more sense to you as a reader. For example, R.A. Salvatore famously wrote the character of Dristo in the book The Crystal Shard in the 80s in the Forgotten Realm setting, in which he introduced the character of Dristo. And his novel The Crystal Shard was the first thing he'd ever published, early, and so forth. It's raw. It's hard, and the character of Dristo hadn't been crystallized yet. It was actually a side character. It wasn't the main character of the story or anything like that. And Dristo himself is actually kind of this happy-go-lucky guy. He's always going to throw himself into battle without really thinking about it ahead of time. And in fact, the main character of the second one of those sort of novellas in the first novel, Wolfgar, is actually thinking to himself, when this guy's going to throw himself into danger from giants or a dragon and so forth, he's thinking to himself, I don't know why I keep following this guy. Me following this guy is going to lead me to my death, but he still does it because it's fun, and so forth. It kind of appeals to Wolfgar's barbarian, combative nature. So, because he loves combat so much, so it resonates with him, even though he knows it's this happy. So that's how Dristo is portrayed in the first novel. But that's not who Dristo is. He's really more of this kind of introspective. He's not going to go into battle without trying to find another way around it first, if possible, and so forth. He's more he will avoid battle. He's more friendly. He's less throwing himself in the battle, so he's more introspective, he's more brooding and so forth, if that makes sense, than the character who's as initially portrayed. And so Salvatore realizes that this is who the character actually is as he's writing him more and more and more throughout the various novels. And so after the first trilogy of series, which happens sequentially, he goes back and writes a prequel, and the prequel of the character that introduces Drizzt, where he was, where he came from, how he got to where he is, and so forth. And that one has him as being sort of this brooding kind of a character. And he continues as a brooding character after the initial trilogy is over with too, when he goes back and kind of catches you up. If you read them in the story that they were published, you will see the character of Dristo develop as the writer R.A. Salvatore wrote them. you will see him develop over time just as the character did. But if you start with the prequel, even though it came first chronologically, but it was the fourth book written, well, the character isn't in the same place anymore as the writer was developing him or as we were reading him. So if you start with the fourth book written and read the first series because it was first chronologically, it's still not going to be, I think, as fulfilling because its writing style is different, the character's different. You're not reading the character organically at that point. And so I think there's value in reading works as they were written by the writer, rather than the order of them themselves. I also think this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people have issues with Fritz Leiber's works. He wrote a ton of works in a fantasy world called Nawan with Grey Mouser and Fafhrd, and the first one was written in the 40s. And he kept writing them decade, and all these were short stories, right? And so he has tons and tons of these short stories that are written with these characters. Well, no short story that he wrote was sequentially after the previous one, right? They were in different times of their lives, in different places of their lives, and so forth. So if you were to publish them chronologically, which is how most people publish them, well, you're getting a short story that he wrote early in his career, and then a short story that he wrote like 25 years into his career when he had a better feel for the characters, and then so forth. It feels a little popping all over the place. You do the same thing with Conan stories. R.E. Howard didn't do Conan stories sequentially or chronologically. He came to Conan stories. Here's a Conan story from how he got started. Here's a Conan story when he's the king, near the end of his life, and he's got kids, right? And so on and so forth. Here's where he's with a pirate, and here's where he's a thief in his younger days. He'll pop around and just have Conan from a lot of different times in his life. And so if you were to publish them, again, chronologically, you're going to be doing this weird thing where you're having the first or second Conan story that was written be like one of the last ones that you're reading because it's so much later in his life and so forth. And it's just popping all over when you're doing sorts of things. So I do think there's value in reading them the way the order the writer wrote them, as opposed to chronologically, or maybe the order that the writer prefers, and so forth. And I don't think the Last Hieroglyph is such an ending to the story that we have to put it off till the end either. I went in originally thinking that, but I was actually a little surprised by the ending, and no spoilers, that it wasn't as much of an ending as I was expecting, and so forth. But anyway, let's get started with the Last Hieroglyph and then finish you up with the first book of the Zothique cycle, which kind of is the coda to this Zothique cycle that he loved so much. And I think it's also probably his most popular one today. I think many of his stories that are coming from Zothique are incredibly popular and long-lasting. I think it's one of the reasons why this little Penguin collection is actually named after it, and multiple stories from the Zothique cycle appear as in the fewer than 20 short stories in this collection. So in the Last Hieroglyph, we're going to be following this astronomer who has never really been that popular or that well loved. The astronomer was born under the sign of the dog, and he has this dog companion that he picked up just randomly while he was traveling that follows him around, this mongrel dog who's really kind of mean and nasty. He also purchased this young one-eyed deaf slave that follows him around too, and both of these people are both the dog and the slave are very loyal to him and so forth because he treats them well. But he's definitely not an an astronomer who's predicting the future and so forth in a sort of astrology sort of setting and trying to predict people. He's definitely not somebody who actually does his job. He knows it. He knows the signs. He's able to predict them once in a while, occasionally, correctly, and so forth. But he'll make up stuff. He'll try to give them a good sort of game when he can when he's not on his game or he's not able to see signs. He'll lie. He'll just come up with things. He's kind of out for himself. So he's arrived at a new city after being kicked out of like his umpteenth city previously, and he's arrived there and so forth. He's setting up shop and so forth. And he sees that the sign of the dog that he was born under is kind of in ascendancy right now, and so forth. And he starts out, and an amazing thing is happening for the first time in his life. Every single prediction he's making is coming true. It's just incredible. And for the first time in his life, he's actually well loved by the people. He's being paid well. He's being welcomed well. And this is this older man. Later on in his life, he's a charlatan, kind of a astrologer who understands astrology enough to make predictions and so forth, but he knows that he's kind of out. And sometimes he can make a true prediction previously, and he would actually give it, but for the most part, he would just come up with something. He's kind of a con man, but all of them are coming true. Now imagine that. what that's going to be like for him. So he's not starting to get any money, he's not starting to get success, he's starting to build a name up for himself and so forth. It's incredible, and so forth. Well, one night he sees that there is these new stars that have appeared. 3 new stars have appeared in the sign of the dog. So he takes a look at it and so forth, spends some time over his charts, and what he's doing is he's trying to figure out what the importance of these 3 new stars that have just suddenly shown up in the sign of the dog for the first time ever. He's looking at all of his sort of astrology texts and so forth. He spends hours poring over everything he can, try to figure it out. He also tries to cast his own horoscope to find out what's happening, because this is his sign. So this is something that's happening in his sign while it's ascendant and he was born under, and so forth. And he finds out, in fact, that he's going to be sent on this sort of journey. He's going to be sent to this sort of god of Zothique. And there's this guy who supposedly created Zothique and will be there when Zothique is destroyed. And he has this book and so forth. His name is Vergama. Is the name of this character. He's oftentimes blessed or cursed and so forth. And in fact, earlier on in the story, he actually blessed Vergama as he was doing well, because he wanted to keep sort of Vergama's virtues and so forth. And there are these various books, texts, and religions that are dedicated to Vergama, and so forth. And according to his own casting, he will be of his own prediction, he's going to be heading to Vergama and so forth. So he wants to put this off as long as time, because Vergama is kind of seen as the god of life and death. He suspects that this means he's going to die, and he soon wants to put this off as long as possible. So he's not going to set off on his journey. It says that the 3 stars are going to signify that there's going to be 3 guides that are going to relieve him and so forth. So he's going to put it off as long as possible. Of course, by about 40 or 50 days in, there are these 3 hieroglyphs that are on his chart that represent 3 different things that are going to happen. One of these hieroglyphs comes off the chart, and it represents somebody who's actually in his room, and will tell it's a mummy, and the mummy tells him who he is, and then says, I am your first guide, gather your things and come with me. And that's kind of the start of the journey to Vergama and so forth. And then you'll wind up in Vergama. And I think that this is one of the most richly written works that Clark Ashton Smith did. I'm going to set it there, but I think that there is this adding this mythological element. While there had previously been gods, demons, and so forth, this is a strong mythological arc that he adds. He actually has a sort of prelude where he has an excerpt from the Book of Vergama, and it's incredibly well written, incredibly well done, incredibly well concepted, and such. And I think that once you start kind of doing this voyage with these 3 guides in sequential succession, seeing the worlds, seeing these underworlds and so forth that you're going to be kind of going through, and then arriving at Vergama and so forth, and then what's going to happen afterwards, I think is very interesting. But anyway, so I'm going to stop it there, because I'm about like maybe 30% of the way through the story. That's going to be it done. Again, I don't want to ruin any spoilers for you, but I think this is a very compelling story. And I certainly understand why Clark Ashton Smith thought this would be a suitable story to the end, although it's not as if you're going into a thing, oh no, there's not going to be any more Zothique stories. There will be more Zothique stories. You might think from a story that says the last X, that's going to be the last story. It's not. It's going to destroy the world or something like that. He doesn't. You're fine. You can continue to go back to it and such. So go ahead and check it out and let me know what you think about it in the comments below. If you've read it, I'd also love to engage with you further, or anything else by Clark Ashton Smith, the Zothique series, and so forth. But anyway, this will be the last Zothique work I'll look at for a while. He does come back to it for some other works too, like Necromancy and Nat, and such. But this is going to be kind of the last story I'm going to look at for a while from this cycle, or some of the other series too. I've done a lot of Clark Ashton Smith stuff recently because I wanted to finish this, and so I'm going to go ahead and put him on pause as a writer for a while I focus on other writers. I may come back to him for a couple of Cthulhu Mythos stories. I'm thinking about doing like a Cthulhu October, where I do like a ton of H.P. Lovecraft and other stories in the early Cthulhu Mythos for you, and so forth. As you can tell from my books that are up on my shelves, I love the Cthulhu Mythos. It's one of my most favorite things, but I haven't done a whole lot of stories that are set in it, so I'll probably come back to Clark Ashton Smith when I come back to do the Mythos strongly, because he's also a strong Mythos writer. I've done a couple of Mythos works for you already from him. But more on the sidelines, not like major sort of feature pieces and so forth. So we'll do some things like Ubu Sathla or something from him. And then anyway, so that's Clark Ashton Smith. and his Zothique work is very strong, very well written, and so forth. If you watch this video to its conclusion, hey, I want to thank you so much. Take some time out of your day, because we all have such busy lives, busy days, and so many things happening that if you spent this time with me, hey, I really appreciate that, so thanks. Also, if you like this video, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. We have so many more videos, reviews, and so forth to follow, where I try to unpack these forgotten, classics from science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So once again, thanks for your time. You have a good one.